"Shut up, you're freezing. Tonight you're sleeping between us," the two Apaches said. The night was colder than anything the boy had ever felt. The wind cut across the open desert like tiny knives, making him shiver violently. His thin jacket, once bright and warm, was now torn and soaked from the light snow that had started falling just after sunset. Each step he took sank slightly into the frozen ground, and he realized with a pang of fear that he had wandered far from his small village. The familiar lights of home were gone, swallowed by the darkness. He hugged himself tightly, trying to keep his body heat from escaping, but the cold seemed to seep into his bones, making his teeth chatter uncontrollably. He had been running for hours, ever since he had left the warmth of his family home. His mother had been crying, his father angry and silent, and the argument that had started in the afternoon had grown louder and more confusing until he could not bear it anymore. He thought he could find some peace in the quiet outside, but now the desert seemed endless, and the silence was frightening rather than calming. Every rustle of the wind through the dry brush sounded like a threat. Every shadow looked like someone watching him. Exhausted, the boy finally stumbled across a small, rocky outcrop. He collapsed behind it, trying to make himself invisible. His hands were numb, and his feet burned from the cold, making him question whether he could continue walking. He curled into a tight ball, pulling his knees to his chest, trying to preserve what little warmth he had left. The stars above twinkled coldly, distant and indifferent to his struggle. The desert stretched out in every direction, dark and unforgiving. Hours seemed to pass as he crouched there. His mind wandered to memories of home, the warmth of the kitchen, the smell of fresh bread, the gentle voice of his mother calling him for supper. But even these memories brought pain, for they reminded him of the shouting, the anger, and the feeling that he no longer belonged. He was alone, truly alone, and the boy realized that fear had taken root in his heart. Suddenly, a faint sound caught his attention. Footsteps, slow and careful, crunching over the frozen ground. He froze, holding his breath, convinced that he would be discovered by someone angry or dangerous. But as the figures came closer, he realized they were not threatening. Two men were walking through the desert, moving with a natural grace, almost as if the land itself guided their steps. They wore thick, practical clothing and carried small bundles of supplies. Their eyes, dark and calm, scanned the surroundings, noticing every detail. The boy wanted to speak, to call out for help, but his lips felt stiff, and the words would not come. The men stopped a few feet away from him, and for a long moment there was silence. The older of the two looked at the boy and noticed the frost on his cheeks, the shaking of his body, the wide, frightened eyes. Without saying much, he walked closer, bending down slightly to his level. "Shut up," he said softly, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. "You're freezing." The boy blinked, confused. The words were not harsh, not angry, they were gentle, filled with concern. The other man stepped closer and offered a thick blanket which the boy clumsily took. The warmth against his skin was immediate, but it was not just the blanket that made him feel safe. There was something in their presence, a quiet strength, a calm that wrapped around him more effectively than any cloth could. "You'll sleep between us tonight," the first man said, and the boy felt a strange relief wash over him. He wanted to say something, to ask questions, to explain himself, but he had no energy. Instead, he nodded weakly, too exhausted to resist. The two men led him to a small hollow behind a rocky ridge, where they had already made a tiny fire. The flames crackled, throwing a soft light on the snow-dusted rocks. The boy sank down near the warmth, feeling the tension in his muscles slowly fade. One of the men handed him a small piece of bread and a bit of dried meat. The food tasted miraculous after hours of hunger, and he ate slowly, savoring each bite, as if it could somehow anchor him to safety. As he ate, he stole glances at the two men. They were quiet, yet their presence was commanding. They spoke little, only giving him what he needed without asking questions that might embarrass or frighten him. Their eyes were alert, always scanning the surroundings, ready to react to any threat. Yet they were patient with him, giving him time to warm up, time to breathe, and time to realize that he was no longer completely alone. The wind howled outside, rattling the rocks and sending small flurries of snow across the ground. The boy shivered, but the fire, the blanket, and the men's calm presence created a small bubble of safety around him. For the first time since he had run away, he allowed himself to relax a little. He realized that these strangers, whom he had initially feared, had seen his vulnerability and chosen to help rather than judge. Hours passed in a quiet rhythm. The men whispered to each other about practical matters, the direction of the wind, the dryness of the wood, the forecast for the night. The boy listened, learning not just about survival in the desert, but about the way people could communicate silently, trust each other, and move through danger together. He felt a flicker of hope, fragile but undeniable, that maybe he could survive the night, maybe he could find a way back to safety, and maybe, in some way, he had found allies in this harsh world. Finally, as the fire burned low, one of the men patted the boy gently on the shoulder. "Lie down, between us," he said again, and this time the boy obeyed without hesitation. He snuggled into the warmth between the two men, feeling the tension in his body dissolve further. The cold was still outside, the night still vast, but here, in this small circle of firelight and blankets, he felt something he had not felt in a long time: safety, care, and protection. Sleep came slowly, but it came. The boy's eyes closed, and he drifted into a dreamless rest, warmed not just by the fire and blankets, but by the unexpected kindness of two strangers who had chosen to help a frightened child on a cold winter night. The boy awoke to the soft warmth of the fire and the quiet breathing of the two men beside him. For a moment he felt disoriented, as if the night had never happened. The cold air outside had not yet touched him, and the blankets wrapped around him like a gentle shield. He blinked slowly, trying to remember where he was. The rocky hollow, the small fire, and the quiet presence of the strangers all came back to him. Relief and gratitude filled him, mingled with a lingering sense of awe. He had expected a night of fear and loneliness, yet here he was, safe and cared for. One of the men stirred and looked at him with a small smile. "You slept well," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Good, you needed it." The boy nodded silently. Words still felt heavy on his lips, as though the long walk through the cold had stolen them from him. He felt embarrassed for being so weak, yet the men's gentle manner made him feel accepted without judgment. The older of the two men stood and shook the snow off his clothing. "We should start the fire again. The morning is cold, and the wind will pick up soon." He moved with careful efficiency, arranging logs and kindling while the boy watched. There was something fascinating about the way they moved, as if every step was measured and purposeful. The boy had never seen people who could survive so well in the wild, and a quiet admiration grew inside him. "You should eat," the younger man said, handing the boy another piece of bread. "It will give you strength." The boy took it gratefully. The simple act of eating while someone cared for him felt almost miraculous. Each bite warmed him more than the fire could. He realized how hungry he had been, not just for food, but for kindness. As the boy ate, the men began speaking quietly, sharing instructions about the land around them. "The wind will move the snow toward the ridge," the older man said. "If we follow that direction, we can stay sheltered from it. The animals will be moving in the opposite direction. You must be careful if you try to track them." The boy listened intently, fascinated by their knowledge. He had never thought of the desert as a living, moving place with its own rules. He realized that surviving here required not only courage but also attention and understanding. After breakfast, the older man gestured for the boy to follow him. "Come with us, I'll show you something." The boy stood unsteadily, still stiff from the cold, and walked with them. The men moved easily over the uneven rocks and frozen ground, guiding him gently. He stumbled several times, and each time one of them offered a hand without a word of scolding. The boy felt a strange sense of safety in their careful attention, and a feeling he had never known before began to grow: trust. They walked to a small clearing where the snow had not yet settled thickly. "See that?" the younger man said, pointing to a series of faint tracks in the ground. "Rabbits, they come here often. Watch carefully." The boy crouched and leaned closer. The tracks were delicate, almost invisible, but the men showed him how to notice the subtle differences in depth and pattern. He felt excitement bubbling inside him, a curiosity he had not felt in months. "Nature can teach you many things," the older man said, his voice quiet but firm. "If you watch carefully, you can learn how to survive, how to find food, and how to stay safe. You can also learn patience." The boy nodded, realizing that these men were not just showing him how to live in the desert, they were teaching him about life itself. The morning passed in a rhythm of observation and practice. The men taught him how to start a small fire using dry wood and stones, how to find water under rocks, and how to move quietly without scaring the animals. Each lesson was repeated patiently, allowing the boy to succeed little by little. Every time he made a small mistake, the men corrected him gently, never raising their voices. By noon, he was beginning to feel proud of what he could do. The confidence he had lost after running away began to return, nurtured by the calm guidance of these strangers. At one point, the older man paused and looked directly at the boy. "You are stronger than you think. You just need to believe in yourself." The boy's heart warmed at the words. He had spent so long thinking he was weak, that the world was against him, and that nothing good could happen. Hearing this quiet affirmation from someone he barely knew felt like a spark in the darkness, a small light guiding him toward hope. The afternoon brought new challenges. The wind grew stronger, carrying with it sharp, icy grains of snow. The boy shivered, but the men remained steady. They showed him how to shield himself from the wind, how to dig small trenches to create warmth, and how to move silently despite the harsh conditions. The desert, which had seemed endless and threatening the night before, began to reveal itself as a place of learning, patience, and resilience. As the day turned to evening, the men decided to prepare a better shelter for the boy. They gathered branches, stones, and scraps of cloth to build a small windbreak against the ridge. The boy helped, feeling useful for the first time in many weeks. His small hands, numb at first, slowly warmed as he moved, and a sense of accomplishment filled him. He realized that survival was not just about strength, it was about observation, patience, and cooperation. By the time the sun was low in the sky, the camp had a small but sturdy shelter. The men laid blankets inside and started a fire. They shared a simple meal, and the boy ate with a sense of gratitude he had never known. Each bite was more than food. It was safety, care, and belonging. The men did not press him to speak about home or the reasons he had run away. Instead, they let him eat, rest, and simply exist without fear. That night, as he lay between the two men again, the boy reflected on the day. He had learned so much, not just about survival, but about human kindness, trust, and patience. For the first time since he had left home, he felt a sense of calm that went beyond physical warmth. The fire crackled gently, the blankets wrapped him in security, and the quiet presence of the men reassured him that he was not alone in the world. He realized that survival was not just about avoiding danger. It was about learning, adapting, and connecting with others. The two men had shown him that even in the harshest conditions, there could be care, guidance, and compassion. He drifted to sleep with a heart that felt lighter than it had in months, a heart that had begun to understand the value of trust and the strength that comes from quiet support. Outside, the wind continued to blow, and the desert stretched endlessly. But inside the small circle of fire and blankets, the boy felt a warmth that could not be measured by temperature alone. It was the warmth of human connection, of being seen and cared for, and of knowing that even in the coldest nights, there could be safety and kindness. The next morning, the boy woke to the soft, golden light of the rising sun filtering through the gaps in the rocks. The cold was still present, but it no longer felt as sharp or threatening. The warmth from the fire the men had carefully kept burning overnight seeped into his body, giving him courage for the day ahead. He looked at the two men beside him and noticed the quiet strength in their movements, the way they checked the surroundings, tended to the fire, and prepared their simple breakfast. He admired them in a way he had never admired anyone before. The older man handed him a small piece of bread and a few dried fruits. "Eat slowly. You need energy for today," he said. His voice was gentle but firm, carrying the kind of authority that came not from shouting, but from knowing and experience. The boy nodded, feeling a mixture of gratitude and nervous anticipation. He had no idea what the day would bring, but he trusted the two men completely. After breakfast, the men motioned for him to stand and follow them. "Today, we'll teach you more than just staying warm and finding food," the younger man said. "We'll show you how to understand the land, how to move carefully, and how to be aware of everything around you. These skills will keep you safe." The boy felt a thrill run through him. He had never thought he could learn so much in one day, let alone from strangers he had only just met. Their first lesson was about movement. The older man demonstrated how to walk quietly across the rocky terrain, avoiding loose stones and snow patches that could give away their position. "The desert listens," he said. "Every sound you make travels far. If you are careful, you can move without being noticed. If you are careless, you may scare away food, or worse, attract danger." The boy tried to copy their movements, his small feet sliding on the frost-covered ground. At first he stumbled and lost his balance several times, but the men were patient, offering hands, gentle corrections, and encouragement. "Good. Now slower. Feel the ground. Listen to it," the younger man instructed. Slowly the boy began to understand the rhythm of the land, the way it responded to each step, the difference between soft snow, hard rock, and frozen dirt. By the time they stopped for a brief rest, he felt a small sense of accomplishment he had never felt before. Next, the men taught him about tracking. They crouched low and examined a series of small animal tracks in the snow. "Rabbits, foxes, and other creatures leave signs everywhere," the older man explained. "If you can read them, you will know where food is, where water might be, and where to avoid danger." The boy leaned closer, studying the patterns. The tracks looked like simple lines at first, but the men showed him how to notice subtle differences in depth, spacing, and direction. He marveled at how much information was hidden in the snow, just waiting for someone to understand it. "Tracking is patience," the older man said quietly. "You cannot rush. You must watch, think, and move carefully. The desert will reward those who respect it." The boy nodded, feeling a sense of connection with the land that he had never felt in his life. For the first time, the desert did not feel empty or threatening. It felt alive, full of lessons and opportunities. As the day progressed, the men introduced him to the art of finding food. They showed him how to identify edible plants, roots, and small fruits hidden among rocks and bushes. They demonstrated how to set simple traps for small animals, emphasizing that their goal was survival, not harm. "We take only what we need," the younger man said. "Respect for life is as important as survival." The boy watched carefully, absorbing every movement, every word. He felt proud when he successfully dug up a small edible root without damaging the plant. Lunch was a quiet affair. They gathered around the fire, sharing what they had prepared. The boy felt a sense of belonging he had never experienced before. He ate slowly, savoring not just the food, but the sense of trust and care that surrounded him. The men spoke softly about their own experiences, how they had learned to survive in the desert, how they had faced harsh winters and scorching summers, and how every lesson had taught them patience, resilience, and respect for nature. The boy listened, feeling that he was part of something larger than himself, a small but important part of the rhythm of life in the desert. In the afternoon, the older man decided it was time to test the boy's courage. "We will move to a more challenging area," he said. "The terrain is steeper, the wind stronger. You must trust what we have taught you." The boy's stomach tightened with nervousness, but he nodded. He knew that fear was part of learning, and he wanted to prove to himself that he could be brave. They climbed a small ridge, the wind biting at their faces. The boy struggled at first, slipping on icy patches and stumbling over rocks. Each time, one of the men offered a steadying hand, guiding him without judgment. Slowly, one step at a time, feel the ground. "Trust yourself," the older man encouraged. Step by step, the boy began to find his balance. His confidence grew, not just in his body, but in his mind. He realized that he could overcome fear by staying calm, observing carefully, and trusting both himself and those guiding him. Once they reached the top, the view took his breath away. The desert stretched endlessly, a sea of white and brown under the pale winter sun. He saw tracks of animals crossing valleys, the shadows of rocks shifting with the wind, and the faint outline of distant mountains. The men stood silently beside him, and for a moment, words were not necessary. The boy felt a sense of awe and respect for the world around him, and a deep gratitude for the two men who had guided him here. The descent was more difficult than the climb. The wind howled and the boy's legs ached from the effort. He stumbled several times, but the men's calm presence gave him courage. "You are doing well. Keep your balance. Focus on the next step," the younger man advised. Slowly, carefully, he made it down without falling. Pride and relief filled him, and he realized that he had grown stronger in just one day. He had learned not just survival skills, but lessons about patience, courage, and trust. As evening approached, they returned to the small hollow where the boy had first found warmth. The men started a fire and prepared a simple meal. The boy helped, feeling useful and important. They shared stories of their past experiences, but more importantly, they listened to him when he spoke. For the first time in weeks, he felt that his voice mattered. He spoke quietly about his fears, his doubts, and his dreams. The men listened without interrupting, nodding and offering gentle guidance. That night, as the boy lay between them under the blankets, he felt a deep sense of calm. The lessons of the day played through his mind. The way he had learned to move silently, read tracks, find food, and face fear. He realized that the desert was not just a place of danger. It was a teacher, and these two men were guides who had shown him the way. The fire crackled softly, and he drifted into a peaceful sleep, feeling stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever before. The boy's heart was lighter now. He had begun to understand that survival was not only about fighting the cold or finding food. It was about learning, observing, trusting, and caring. The two men had shown him that even in harsh conditions, there could be guidance, kindness, and wisdom. And as he slept, he dreamed not of running away, but of growing stronger, learning more, and facing the world with courage and hope. The next morning, the boy awoke to a wind that felt sharper and stronger than any he had experienced before. The desert seemed different today, wilder, untamed, almost alive with a restless energy. He shivered beneath the blankets, but the presence of the two men beside him made him feel safe. They were already awake, quietly tending to the fire, preparing breakfast and checking the surrounding area. The boy watched them with admiration. Every movement was purposeful, every action careful and precise. "Today will be a bit more challenging," the older man said, glancing at him with steady eyes. "We need to test what you have learned. The desert is not always calm. Sometimes it will demand courage, patience, and clear thinking. Are you ready?" The boy hesitated for a moment, a flicker of fear in his chest. But then he remembered all he had learned, the quiet strength of the men, the lessons about observation, patience, and trust. He nodded firmly. "Yes," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. They packed their small belongings and began walking toward a ridge farther from their shelter. The terrain became more difficult with each step. The rocks were jagged and uneven, the snow harder and slicker underfoot. The boy struggled at first, slipping and almost falling several times. Each time, one of the men was there, steadying him with a calm hand and encouraging words. "Focus. Feel the ground beneath your feet. Move one step at a time," the older man instructed. Slowly, the boy began to trust his own instincts. He discovered that by observing carefully and moving deliberately, he could navigate the terrain without fear. As they reached the top of the ridge, the wind picked up even more, swirling snow in sharp gusts that made the boy flinch. The view from above was breathtaking. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a vast expanse of white and brown, dotted with distant ridges and valleys. But the beauty was overshadowed by the harshness of the wind and the isolation of the high ridge. The boy's heart raced, not just from the climb, but from the realization of how small and vulnerable he felt in this vast landscape. "Look around carefully," the younger man said. "The desert can teach you more than just survival skills. It can show you courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting even when you are afraid." They paused to observe the tracks in the snow. The boy noticed a set of faint marks leading down a slope. The men explained that they belonged to a small herd of deer, moving cautiously through the snow. The boy crouched low, watching them silently. He realized that fear could make him clumsy, impatient, or careless, but calm focus allowed him to see details he would otherwise miss. For the first time, he felt connected not only to the men guiding him, but also to the land itself. Suddenly, the wind shifted, carrying with it a louder, harsher sound. Snow whipped across the ridge in sharp, stinging flakes. The boy's hands and face began to grow numb despite his layered clothing. Panic threatened to take over, but he remembered the lessons of the past days. He took a deep breath, feeling the rhythm of the land beneath his feet, the careful movements of the men beside him, and the warmth of his growing confidence. He could do this. He could survive. The descent from the ridge was the real test. The snow and ice made each step dangerous. One wrong move could lead to a fall, and the boy's heart pounded as he carefully followed the men down the slope. "Slow, watch the stones. Use your hands for balance," the older man advised. Every step required concentration, courage, and trust. The boy felt fear, but he also felt determination. He had learned to rely on his instincts, to move carefully, and to trust the guidance of the men who had taken him in. Halfway down, the boy slipped on a patch of ice and stumbled, sending a small shower of snow into the air. He froze, expecting anger or disappointment, but the men simply extended their hands. "Good, you caught yourself," the younger man said with a calm smile. "Mistakes happen. What matters is how you respond." This moment stayed with the boy. He realized that courage was not about never falling. It was about getting up, learning, and moving forward even when the world felt harsh and unforgiving. The ridge was no longer terrifying. It was a teacher, and he was learning its lesson step by step. After the difficult descent, they reached a small plateau where the wind was slightly calmer. The men encouraged the boy to rest while they gathered dry wood for a fire. He sat on a rock, catching his breath, feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. The sun had begun to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow, and the boy felt a strange mix of awe and relief. He had faced fear, navigated danger, and come through stronger than before. As the men started the fire, the boy began to understand another lesson. Survival was not only about physical strength, but about patience, observation, and emotional resilience. The desert tested every part of a person, not just the body, and he had begun to see that courage came from preparation, knowledge, and trust. He felt a quiet pride, knowing he was capable of more than he had ever imagined. Dinner that night was simple but satisfying. The boy helped prepare the food, feeling useful and respected. The men spoke gently about their own experiences with the harsh desert winters, sharing stories of storms, nights spent in the cold, and lessons learned over years of living close to the land. The boy listened carefully, absorbing not just the survival tips but the wisdom embedded in each story. He realized that their guidance was as much about shaping his character as it was about teaching him skills. After eating, the trio settled around the fire. The boy lay between the two men once again, wrapped in blankets and warmed by the gentle crackle of the flames. He reflected on the day, the climb, the wind, the fear, and the courage he had discovered within himself. The desert no longer seemed like an enemy. It was a teacher, harsh but fair, revealing strength, patience, and resilience with every challenge. As he drifted to sleep, the boy understood that courage was not a single act. It was a series of choices made in small moments, trusting himself, listening carefully, observing patiently, and moving forward despite fear. He had learned that the harshest conditions could bring out the best in a person, and that guidance and trust could transform even a frightened child into someone capable of facing the unknown. That night the boy dreamed not of running but of climbing ridges, reading tracks in the snow, and moving through the world with quiet confidence. The fire flickered softly, the blankets kept him warm, and the presence of the two men reassured him that he was not alone. He had faced a test of courage, and he had passed. He knew that the lessons of the ridge would stay with him forever, shaping the way he would face challenges in the future. The wind outside continued to howl, but inside the small circle of warmth, the boy felt calm, strong, and ready. He had discovered that courage was built step by step, choice by choice, and that the desert, with all its harshness and beauty, could teach lessons no classroom ever could. The next morning, the boy awoke to the pale light of dawn stretching across the desert. The fire, carefully tended by the two men, still glowed softly, casting shadows on the rocks around them. He felt a mix of anticipation and sadness. The days he had spent with these strangers had taught him more than he could have imagined. He had learned about survival, courage, patience, and trust, and now the time had come to return to the world he had once fled. The older man noticed the boy stirring and gave him a small nod. "It's time," he said quietly. "You have learned much, and now you can take these lessons with you." The boy swallowed hard. He had grown attached to the men who had taken him in, guided him, and shown him kindness in the harshest of conditions. The thought of leaving filled him with a quiet sorrow, but he also understood that leaving meant taking what he had learned and using it to face the challenges that awaited him. They packed their small camp carefully. The men showed the boy how to fold blankets, arrange firewood, and leave no trace behind. The boy helped eagerly, understanding the importance of responsibility and respect for the land. As they walked together toward the path that led back to his village, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. These men had not only kept him safe, they had changed the way he viewed the world, teaching him to face it with courage and thoughtfulness. The journey back was quieter than the days before. The boy walked steadily, his confidence growing with each step. He remembered the lessons about moving carefully over rocks, reading tracks in the snow, and observing the world around him. Each skill he had learned was now second nature, and he felt a new sense of independence. The desert, which had once seemed endless and frightening, now felt familiar and full of wisdom. Along the way, the boy asked questions about the animals, the plants, the changes in the wind. The men answered patiently, explaining not just what to notice but why it mattered. The boy realized that knowledge was not just about survival. It was about understanding the world and his place within it. He began to feel a sense of pride in what he had learned, but also a humility, understanding that there was always more to observe, more to understand, and more to respect. As they neared the edge of the desert, the boy caught sight of his village in the distance. The familiar rooftops and smoke rising from chimneys filled him with a strange mixture of comfort and anxiety. He knew he had changed during these past days. He was stronger, braver, and more aware. The village would feel different now, and he wondered if anyone would notice the transformation within him. The two men paused at the boundary between the desert and the village. They turned to face him, their expressions calm but serious. "Remember what you have learned," the older man said. "Use your knowledge, your courage, and your trust wisely, and never forget that kindness and respect are as important as strength." The younger man added, "You are capable of more than you think. Challenges will come, but if you remain patient and careful, you will overcome them. And always remember that even in the hardest moments, there are people who will help if you trust them." The boy nodded, feeling tears prick his eyes. He wanted to say thank you, to explain how much they had changed his life, but the words felt too heavy for the moment. Instead, he hugged them both tightly, feeling their warmth and strength one last time. He knew that even though he was leaving the desert behind, the lessons he had learned would stay with him forever. As he stepped into the village, the familiar sights and sounds felt both comforting and strange. Children played in the streets, women carried baskets, and the smell of cooking bread and smoke filled the air. The boy realized that he had changed. He walked with a steadier step, his head held higher, and a quiet confidence in his heart. The fear that had driven him to run away was gone, replaced by courage and understanding. He returned home to a mixture of relief and concern from his family. His mother hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. His father looked at him with a more guarded expression, but the boy sensed a quiet respect in his eyes. He did not need to explain the lessons of the desert in detail. His actions, his confidence, and his calm presence spoke louder than words ever could. Over the following days, the boy began to apply what he had learned. He moved carefully, observed the world around him, and approached challenges with patience and thoughtfulness. He helped his family, shared what he knew about plants and survival, and gradually became a source of calm and guidance for others in the village. The lessons from the desert, courage, trust, patience, and respect, had become a part of him. The memory of the two men remained vivid in his mind. He thought about the quiet strength in their eyes, the gentle guidance, and the unwavering patience they had shown. He realized that their kindness had not only kept him alive, but had taught him how to live fully, with awareness and understanding. He promised himself that he would carry these lessons forward, not just for survival, but to help others whenever he could. Months passed, and the boy grew stronger, both in body and spirit. He remembered the cold nights, the harsh wind, and the challenges of the desert, but he also remembered the warmth of the fire, the blankets, and the calm, reassuring presence of the two men. He realized that true strength was not just about enduring hardship, but about learning, trusting, and caring. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant mountains, the boy sat quietly outside his home, thinking about the desert and the men who had guided him. He felt a deep sense of gratitude and peace. The world was still vast, still unpredictable, but he no longer felt small or powerless. He had learned that courage, patience, and trust could carry him through even the harshest conditions. And so, the boy's journey came full circle. From fear and uncertainty, he had moved to confidence and understanding. The lessons of the desert, the kindness of the two men, and the challenges he had faced had transformed him. He knew that life would continue to bring obstacles, but he was ready. He had discovered the strength within himself and the power of guidance, kindness, and trust. The boy smiled to himself, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with fire or blankets. It was the warmth of understanding, of growth, and of hope. He had faced the unknown, learned its lessons, and emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to face the world. The desert, harsh and unforgiving, had given him the greatest gift of all: the knowledge that courage, patience, and kindness could light the way even in the darkest, coldest nights.